Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to show you the sample project outlines that I've created for you to use as a base for your own sample projects. Let's start with the first one. This first sample project is an intake. So let's see what that looks like. We're going to just go through a couple of the elements that are going to be in every project. So you can see here that I put the Suffolk logo as well as the title of the class in the upper left corner of our interview. And this also is using a special theme that changes the look and feel of the buttons a little bit from the default look and feel. You can change those on your own to whatever you like. Let's go ahead and fill this out as though I'm myself. I just put about 3 or 4 questions here for you to go through so you can get a real sense of how you might use something like this for your own project. You obviously might have a lot more intake facts that you need to gather. So here, we're just going to capture a couple of things. So here, this is a demo of how you can add extra columns to your interview, and it will still be added to the intake automatically. And that's it. And what we've done with this list is everything that the person enters is saved to a Google Sheet, which is one of the simplest types of ways for you to capture client information. There's no reason why you couldn't also send this information to something like Clio or whatever case management system that your office might be using for your particular project. Here's what the actual intake looks like. So every time we run, it adds a new row to our Google Sheet, which has all of the information that we included in it. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at the code now. What we're doing here at the very beginning is we have a block called the metadata block, where we can capture information that isn't shown in a question, but is part of the overall interview. So we have a title that we set that shows in the tab as the title of the interview. We can have a short title. Let me show you when that would appear. If we narrow the width of our interview, then that's what would normally show. Because we're setting a custom icon here as our heading, it doesn't show there right now. We can have a list of authors, and remember in a Docassemble YAML file, putting that little dash at the beginning means that we're making a list. So I can add an additional author if I want. Before I save this, let me just show you where we're using that author information right now. If I click the Help button, I've put the names of all the interview authors right there. So we only had Jane Roe and John Doe because I hadn't saved it yet. But if I save it and refresh, you'll see that it now shows 3 names, which matches the list that we put here of authors. Now the logo that I've created here, you probably don't need to customize to do anything with, but what it's expecting is to find a logo that is in a file that's installed on the server. So I've installed one here for you. If you want to keep using the Suffolk logo, you don't need to make any changes here. If you want to install a different logo, I can help you with that part. This is really what we're seeing here in the logo section of the metadata is a block of HTML. We can't put any variables in this at all, so we have to write it exactly the way we want it to look. And that's why this path right here is an exact path that's on the server. Here I have some text that I can include as part of our logo also. The revision date here at the bottom is used. You can use that internally. There's no way for it to display to the user of your interview unless you intentionally display it, which we've done here. So let's go ahead and update that too so you can see what that looks like. You can see there, now it says today's date. The next thing that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about in terms of a Docassemble interview are some of the other optional things you can configure. So for example, I like to have the help button shown next to a question if there's special help for that question. So I've done that here. This interview actually doesn't demonstrate that. More interesting for you might be the Bootstrap theme here. So let's comment out this line and let's try putting in a new Bootstrap theme. This is a really simple way for you to change the look and feel of your interview to make it a little bit more distinctive and perhaps professional looking as well. I'm going to a website called Bootstrap CDN, which has a bunch of themes that are going to be really easy for me to use because I can link to them directly from the internet. But if you just Googled Bootstrap theme, you'll see that there's tons of results. Bootstrap is a really popular base for websites. It was created by Twitter, and there are dozens of, if not hundreds of themes you can choose from and just download and use pretty easily. I would say that if you're just trying to make small changes to your look, choose one of these ones on Bootswatch from the CDN. Those are going to be really the easiest for you to install. So remember, this is the look that we have right now. If I save with that new theme installed, or linked to rather, I've completely changed the appearance of my interview. So let's go back to the other look, which I think is a little nicer. Let's go a little further down in our interview to see what else we have going on here. So we haven't used this interview help feature before, but I think it's important for you to do that so you can show a little bit about who you are. I've put, just as a sample, I put a logo of Suffolk, but you might put your own picture there so people know who wrote the interview, which is kind of a nice thing to have. So they have a better sense of what your project's all about and who's standing behind it. I can link to a file here as our image that's somewhere out on the internet. So you could easily upload something to imageur.com, or you can upload it as a static file in the static folder and then link to it by just using the file name. Right here, this is the boilerplate code that you don't really need to spend a lot of time thinking about, which shows the list of authors. So you can move that whole block of code to wherever you wanted to show the list of authors. And I put a link to our class, but you might link to some other kind of information that's helpful for someone who's reading your interview. And here you might want to leave this alone as well. This just shows the date that the interview was last updated. It's important to let people see how fresh your project is so they have an idea of whether the law might have changed. If it's a 5-year-old project, they might be a little bit less likely to want to use it without double checking that there aren't any changes in the law. This is something that we have done before. We're creating an object named individual, named client, which is an individual object. We're going to use client to store a lot of the information that we're capturing in our intake. I recommend you do the same thing if your goal is to do intake information for a person. And then below this, in lines 52 and 54, we're including 2 special modules that I wrote for this sample project. One of them takes the contents of your interview and turns them into a really simple list that you can upload. It's actually a dictionary that you can upload to different sources. And then the second module is the connection to Google Sheets. So if you need to connect to a different data source to save your information into a database, an Airtable, or perhaps a Clio or another case management system, you would basically swap out this module for one that I could help you write. I won't expect you to do that part on your own. This is going to be familiar as well. This is the code block that controls the order of our questions. You'll see here that this is actually kind of important in this interview, that I've asked for all of the facts before I send my list of facts to Google Sheets. So I have that happening right before the ending screen. But if I didn't actually capture one of those facts, then I wouldn't be able to send it to Google Sheets. It would be left out of our dictionary. So that's an important thing to get in the right order. All right, so I put a lot of comments in this next code block that help explain exactly what we're doing. But this is the magic code block that actually sends the information to Google Sheets. And it's actually only 2 lines of code that we need to use, pay attention to. This function here, called append with column labels, creates a new row in a Google Sheet. And it will automatically add a new column if there's a new label in our dictionary, a new key in the dictionary that doesn't already exist in the first row. So that means no matter what fields you add to your interview, they'll always be able to be sent directly to Google Sheets. That's one of the nice things about Google Sheets compared to other database systems. You can keep adding more columns. Airtable doesn't happen to allow you to do that. If you wanted to use something like Airtable or a case management system or another database, you'd have to know in advance exactly which names you wanted to use. So one thing you might consider doing is starting out with Google Sheets and then leaving that as a future project. If you have time, you might actually want to still do that step last when you've really settled and finalized the names of the different fields that you need to capture in your database. Here we say the name of our sheet. And this function here turns all of the variables in our interview into a format that works with this append with column labels function. So what I would say you would do if you're making another interface to a different database, we're going to still use this get simple vars function. And we're going to just have it work with the same type of information. It's going to be something similar to this append with column labels function that works with the same input. You see that the get simple vars has one argument here, which is optional. It's this parameter called skip. And this is fields that we're capturing in our interview that we don't want to bother to send to Google Sheets. Then at the end of the code block, to make sure that we run everything in the code block, we have just kind of a dummy variable that we're setting called sent responses to Google Sheets. And we need to set it to some value, doesn't matter what it is. And that's what we're referring to in our earlier code block that controls the order of the questions. So that's this variable right here on line 68. Everything below should look very familiar to you. This is just the basic questions that we were able to see on the screen, where we're asking for the client's name, their address. Here we turn on address auto-completion. We have some different types of questions here. You may not have used the checkboxes before, but that's explained really well inside the documentation. Now you have a little bit more context for what checkboxes creates, which is a dictionary. So that might make more sense now that you've read a little bit about dictionaries and lists. This dictionary is going to be a list of labels like apple, peach, pear, and then each dictionary value is going to be either true or false, depending on whether that option was checked or not checked. And then finally, we have our ending screen, which is an event, remember, because it's the ending point of our interview. And we're just showing a little preview of what we've captured. So this right here is just going to be the values. It doesn't include the labels of the values. Just that's something I was using when I was debugging. But you can leave in to do the same thing to make sure your interview is doing what you want until you have it finalized. And then here is a link to the actual spreadsheet. So let's say we wanted to change that spreadsheet that we were sharing with our interview and capture it in a different place. Let me just show you what you would do to change this to work with your project. Let's make a new spreadsheet. We can name it whatever we like. We're just going to remember that name. Let's call it My Project 2. Now, you're going to want to delete all but the first row of your interview in order to capture your interview data in a good place, because our function's not smart enough to know the empty rows. So let's just go ahead and delete those first 1,000 rows. Now we are going to share it. And we're going to share it with a special address, email address, which has permission to for us to send information to it in Google from our Docassemble server, rather.
This is the top result.
All right, so I'm going to just scroll down to that code block here where I put the name of the address that we need to share it with. So it's this address right here. It's a special email account called a Google Service account. So we're going to share it, and then we're going to uncheck that option to notify people, because that'll try to send an email to this address, which doesn't actually have the ability to receive emails. So just click OK. All right, now we have permission. Our Docassemble server has permission to send information to this My Project 2 Google Sheet. So let's change the sheet that we're sending it to. We're going to change the part here where it says Final Project Test Sheet to My Project 2. Hit Save. Now if we run our interview, we should be saving information to this sheet here that we just made. All right, so I just wanted to show you what we did when we actually got that Google Sheet in there correctly. It turns out there's a version problem in Docassemble, which I can fix manually for you. I'm hoping that Jonathan, the Docassemble author, can fix that for us as well, which was causing this error here when I tried to change the Google Sheet. So now we're using our new Google Sheet. Let's go ahead and just show quickly what that looks like. All right, so I didn't update this link here, but you'll see that my answers I just created were saved to this sheet. But now I'm going to show you the second sample. All right, let's take a look at the second interview that we created here. This one is very simple. All that we've done is the same basic interview. You'll see the same configuration choices here. We actually don't need this G Sheets module for our Word document. But instead of sending the information to Google Sheets, we're downloading a Word document at the end. A lot of you are going to do this. So the nice thing about a Word document is that you have a lot more control over the formatting of it than you do with the kind of templates that we've been using, which are using Mako tags. So let's do the same thing. Go through the questions. You'll see they're exactly the same. But now at the end of our interview, we get a document instead. So let's go through the basics of formatting a Word document. You can see here we have a lot more control over the look. We have the standard Word blue header. And let me just quickly show you a new capture. All right, so now we're taking a look at the actual template. So this is really similar to a template that we've been using all along with Mako tags. Here's the real big difference. Instead of using a $sign and some curly braces to put a variable in, we use 2 curly braces on either side. It's almost the only difference. You can still use functions, you can use objects. Here's the difference for conditional text. So if you remember, inside a question or inside the other type of template, we used %if at the beginning of a line. We have another option we didn't have before, which is inline if statements. So we can have an if statement like this. Notice we use 1 curly brace and we use a % before the curly brace. That means it's a command rather than just showing a variable. That lets you put some optional text in the middle of a sentence really easily. And this variation right below lets us put the if statements in a little bit neater place on their own line. And instead of just using curly brace %, use curly brace % and then the P, which means it can delete the paragraph that this line is on. And we're going to make sure to use the %P version at the beginning and the opening and the closing of our if statement, our conditional text. Otherwise, this should all look very familiar to you. I'm going to show you where to upload that file as well. So in order to work with our templates, we're going to go to a new folder inside the playground, which is the templates folder. You see here we have a couple of templates that are available to us. So we can upload it right from here. Browse and then upload the file. Okay, otherwise this interview is exactly like the one that sends data to Google Sheets. The big thing to learn about is the very small variations in the type of template that we're working with. I want to point out one thing here. So I chose to show the version of the template that's a PDF because that's easy to show in line in the interview. And the .pdf, it's not the file name. That's actually an attribute of an object, a DA file object, which is named my final report. All right, I'm going to show you the last variation of interviews that we have here. So that is a ledger. This is a really different type of interview than the other ones that we're showing because it's not linear. It doesn't have a start and an end. You can just keep going through and looping through to different points of the interview. So let's run through it first. I still have an intro screen, but once I've gone through the intro screen, I get to this menu of different buttons that I can click. So this is a really basic ledger. It just has like an item, like a name maybe for an inventory, for a website maybe where you'd let people order products from you. So let's say we have one widget that's $100. Let's add a second widget. A dingbat for $20 and 99 cents. Let's make it $19.99. I can look at a list to see what I've already captured. I have the add another option here too. I can download a report. Now, because I'm downloading the report and the report needs some information about me, it's prompting me for those fields that it needs to let me download the report. So that part works the same as Docassemble. When you have a mandatory question, in this case it's the download screen, it's going to make sure it captures all of the fields it needs to show you that final endpoint that you made mandatory. And here's our file that we can download. Just like the first example, this is a template in Microsoft Word that I made, and we're using the ability to show a list by repeating through the list until we show all of the items in it, a for loop. I'll let you take a look at that later on your own. We have the option here to click a link to go back to the main menu. You can add an item. Now if we want to download a report, it's going to have 3 items in it instead of just 2. One other thing that I'm demonstrating here, something like this where you're adding items over time, you might want to come back to that later to keep working on your same interview. So we have a little widget here that lets you email a link or send it via text message to somebody else, including yourself, who you might want to keep adding more things to the list. So I know one of the projects that we had was going to do something like this for helping people track every place they applied for housing. That's not something you're going to sit down and write the whole list in one day. You're going to come back to it like every week and update it with more of the places you've looked for housing. So I have 3 options here: emailing, texting, or just copying a link. So let's copy that link, and I'll just show you what that looks like. I've made this interview so that anybody can open it with just the link. But it's a very hard link to guess. As you can see here, it has a really long random line in the name. And I'm opening this in an incognito window, but just with that link, I'm able to go back and see my interview. So let's go a little bit into the details of how this interview is constructed. The beginning part is exactly the same as our other samples. We have one more object we're using, which is a DA list. And you'll see here that this DA list is collecting objects in it. In order to let us click that add button without already having anything in the list, I'm just saying that the list is already complete at the beginning. I had to set this special attribute called the complete attribute. That makes sure that Docassemble will look for the named attribute here, which is actually is the name of each item, before it will let me add another item. We have a new module here, which creates that list of buttons and shows them really nicely on the screen. You don't have to do anything to configure that. The function's there that I wrote to let you see that list of items. And there's some special CSS, which is styling, that goes along with those buttons. Our mandatory interview block looks a little bit different. We still have, so first here, I'm setting multi-user to true. That lets me share the link to more than one person to jump back into the interview from a different computer. And our main thing here is our button menu screen. And the ending screen actually should never be reached because the button menu screen is it should never be reached by using this code block, that is. All right, so a long explanation here that you can read. What we're doing is we're creating a data structure in Docassemble. We're using YAML to do it, so it's a little bit easier to track and to read and make changes to it on your own if you wanted to. But you could use a regular code block and use that to create this data structure. So this is the data structure that drives our button menu, which is actually a list of dictionaries. So you can see here, we know it's a list because the line starts with the dash. And then the colon, remember, is in YAML, a signal that it's a dictionary. So each item in this is a dictionary with 3 keys: label, URL, and icon. The second item here, instead of having URL, it uses a label named action. And I'll explain what that means. Here at the top of our data block, we have the name of the variable it's going to be assigned to, which is called buttons. And then we need this data keyword to show the actual content of the dictionary. All right. This should be pretty straightforward. So we have label, which is plain text. That corresponds to the label that you see underneath the icon. Icon should also make sense. It's the name of the image that's displayed right here. So we have the plus sign. And then URL is a link. It could be any link on the internet, but we're going to use links that direct different parts of our interview to do next actions. This action here is the one that lets you add a new item to a list. So our list is named ledger. This is a built-in method of a list, which lets you add new items when you visit that special link. The other form of this that we're using here is the one that's called action. So an action is really just saying define this variable. So it will run it again, even if it's defined it before, and it could let you change the value there, or it could let you define it if it hasn't been defined yet. So let's make a new one. So let's make a new link called update my personal info. So we start with the label. This is going to be an action. And we're going to make the action client.name.first because we're going to let them change the name of the client. Then we're going to go with icon. We're going to choose a new icon from Font Awesome. So this link right here, that's right in the comment, is one that you can use to find some more free icons to decorate your project. So it's going to be kind of a profile. Let's just try searching for profile. Okay, so maybe this address card is a good one for us to use, or ID card. Let's choose ID card as the icon that we want to use. Actually, let's use user circle. We can save our interview. Refresh. Maybe we have to run it again. Let's try that. Okay, now we have a new button here, which lets us go to update the personal info. And it takes us right to that screen where we have the name. All right, and let's try clicking it again. You'll see it lets you both add it and edit, which is kind of a nice feature. So this is a way to have an interview that's driven by you clicking links rather than by a linear progress. Okay, so here's our basic screen that shows the buttons. We're using this function called button field, which uses that dictionary as its argument. The rest of this is kind of just a nice way to show what we've done so far. This is an event because it is an ending screen, even though you can take more actions from it. There's no continue button. That's really what the event modifier does. It sets it so that there's no continue button on the screen. At the beginning here, we're using undefined so that we can go back and change the value of sending to phone and sending to email. This is a little bit new. This is a way for us to show off the feature where we're reviewing the items in our list using nice little links. And let me just add something here so you can see what that looks like. So that's a built-in function that's pretty nice where you can get the edit button, the delete button. We can only do that when we create a table. So this should be pretty self-explanatory. First, we're assigning the table to a variable name. So we're going to use it as an attribute of our actual list. We say what the rows are going to come from, which is each item in our ledger list is going to be used as a row. And then the column headings are going to be whatever we describe here. So that's actually Python code that goes underneath here. So we don't use the Mako tags with the brackets and the $sign. We just write out the variable that's going to be used there. This option to edit changes what's going to be. Oh, here's the problem. We didn't want to use ledger.name, we just wanted to use name. I was wondering why the edit button didn't work. Yeah, there we go. So that fixed that problem. All right. So we have a screen where we show the review, and we're going to use a continue button field so we can see that and hit the continue button after we're done reviewing it. But it's actually kind of equivalent to an event screen. And the rest of the options are really similar. I'll show you one more thing, which is the section where we actually send the links by email or text. So here is the text of that email or text message. It's really just a subject and then some content. And this interview URL function gives you a link that you can click that takes you back into your interview. We needed to have multi-user equal true at the beginning for that to work without having it be encrypted. Here's the very simple code. We have SMS and email built into our Docassemble server. So it's as simple as these couple lines of code. So if the person wanted to send it to the phone, we're going to send it as an SMS message. If the person wanted to send it to email, then we're going to send it to that email address that they gave us. And we're going to use the same template in both circumstances. Sometimes you're going to want to use two different templates because maybe your SMS is going to be much shorter than your email, but this was a short email, so it didn't matter. And we're using that same trick here at the end to make sure the whole code block runs through of setting a variable, kind of a dummy variable, to true at the end of the code block. And then we're downloading our ledger at the end. And again, we are wanting to make sure that it gets updated every time, and that's what this line here, 223, does, which makes sure that we're reconsidering it. That means that it's not going to use the old version of the file if we make a change. It's going to recreate the file every time and show the latest changes to our list. That is it.